Awfully nice to have you. As always, I love our visits, and I love introducing you to interesting people that, are my friends too. So this is Henry Fortunato, and Henry is a historian. He is the founder of the Sunflower Republic, which is, you just do all kinds of interesting projects. I don't know how to pinpoint you, Henry.
Well, we're a creative services firm that focuses on developing public history projects. We've got 2 projects going on trails, one in Overland Park, one in Lawrence, and then we have a couple of traveling exhibits that we're working on. But it's all about public history.
Well, and when you talk about trails, that's another side of Henry, because he believes Solvitur ambulando.
Solvitur ambulando, solve it by walking.
Yes.
I walk every day, and I work through most of whatever my challenges are that day, I sort of solve them by walking.
Well, and you walked, how many miles did you trek over Kansas? Which I thought was insane at the time, but you did make it.
You did tell me it would be insane. I remember you were actually a little
concerned. I said,
concerned.
Henry, have you lost your mind?
You weren't the only person who thought that, and I did decide that it was kind of madness. Well, by my calculation, I did 450 miles over the course of 39 days. I left my front door in Overland Park, and 39 days later, my wife picked me up 3 miles west of the Greeley County line.
And Greeley County is way out there. It's Greeley County is the last county before you hit Colorado.
Greeley County is so far away. It's one of those 4 counties in Kansas that's actually in the Mountain Time Zone. It took her 6.5 hours to drive out to get me.
And Greeley County is kind of interesting because the first carloads of wheat that were shipped were grown by a man by the name of Fishman who lived in Greeley County.
Well, that's very interesting you say that, because Route 96, which is what I was walking on, which goes into Greeley County.
That's the one with all the snakes.
Yeah, that's the one with all the snakes.
Yes.
But it goes through Lane County as well, which is a huge wheat growing area.
It all is out there.
And
there's not much else there, Henry.
Well, there's some great people out there. But the point I'm making is, in Lane County, every one of these counties has their own numbering system. Some do it by hundreds or thousands or letters or names, and if they're in names, they go in alphabetical order. In Lane County, every north-south road that intersects Route 96 is named for a different strain of wheat.
Oh, now see, there is a factoid that we all must have.
And I wouldn't have hit me if I hadn't walked and gone through Triticale and all those sort of things.
And Henry can speak of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings. But today we're going to talk about National Trails Day and the Indian Creek Trail. Interpretive signage project, Henry, and he designed it in concert with the Johnson County Museum.
Well, it's a project that's being developed under the auspices of the Johnson County Museum, with tremendous technical assistance from Johnson County Community College, particularly some historians here.
Well, Jim Liker, for one.
Jim Liker is the peer reviewer, and Farrell Hoy Janab is the chief copy editor, and there's been some others involved as well. But the idea here is that the Indian Creek Trail is, it's the longest trail in the Metro Green system. It starts in far southwestern Olathe, it goes through Overland Park, Leawood, and it actually goes across the border into Kansas City, Missouri for about 3.2 miles.
And the whole trail is what?
About 25 miles.
25 miles.
From where it begins to where it ends. The segment in Overland Park is 10.1 miles. And it's largely an east-west segment, which means that it's intersected with all of those classic, prosaic Johnson County street names that everybody drives on, Metcalf and Rowe and Knoll and Quivira and Flum. Let alone College Boulevard and 435.
And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I do want to say that I believe that you believe that local history gets the short end of the straw sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think that's very true. I think that for people like me who are not from here, there aren't a lot of opportunities to learn about this place unless you really seek it out by going to the Johnson County Museum or by going to a library and getting some books out. And your kids, the kids aren't going to get too much of it either. I was talking to my younger kids the other day, and they both said that Kansas and regional history gets covered in the fourth quarter of 7th grade.
And that's it.
7th grade social studies, and that's it.
That's it. That's right.
Well, you're an educator. I mean, did you?
Well, that's right. We talked about local history very quickly.
So I think that's a real problem because if you don't know the history of where you live, then there's a lacking of a sense of place, and I think the trails are particularly important for that because, you know, they're sort of walks through anywhere USA. There's no sense of where you are.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
And so this project which interprets the history of these various street names, the derivation of these street names at the intersection of the trail, it's going to give a sense of place to one that really doesn't exist anymore right now.
Let's start out as we get down to business here with some pictures and some fun facts about our local history. So let's start with College Boulevard. And as you know, the college sits on College Boulevard, and you might want to see, I picked the pictures that interested me from the markers that you will find at the various streets where the trail intersects. But if you want to see a picture of what College Boulevard looked like in its infancy, I think we can show you. And there it is, a wagon, and that's an
amazing photograph. That was taken in...
That's William Warren driving.
Yes, William Warren, taken in 1946. It's not called College Boulevard then.
Well, now, that picture wasn't taken in 1946.
Oh, yeah, it was. 1946.
And
it looks like something out of the 19th century.
Oh, really?
But it's 1946.
See, I wouldn't have believed that, Henry.
No, of course not.
I thought you were losing it.
No, I found it. As a matter of fact, I found it in the archives. The Kansas City Star. That's 1946.
And that's what College Boulevard looked like in 1946.
But it wasn't called College Boulevard
well,
then.
No, it was just
called
a wide place.
It was called 111th Street.
Yeah.
And because if you think about it, right, it's in Johnson County we do it by eighths. So the next big section line is 103rd, right? So 103, and the next one's 119th. So that was 111th Street, and it was 111th Street until the 1970s.
Well, and 111th Street, where we are sitting today, looks more like this. And there is the Johnson County Community College and all of the various buildings that make up the complex, of which we are so very proud, living in Johnson County.
Well,
but you have to wait and see the marker to find out all the rest of the information.
Well, the panel tells the story of how 111th Street and the college sort of came together, and eventually it became called College Boulevard. But if you look at some of the early publications of Johnson County Community College, it still lists its address as 111th Street.
Oh, does it really?
And then it changed because there was a road widening that was going to take place, and the president of the college asked the mayor of Overland Park what they were going to get if they gave up some of this land for the road widening. And the mayor said, well, you're going to get a good road. And the college president says, well, why not name it College Boulevard? And that's how it happened.
Well, you know what historians really do, don't you, Henry? They read dead people's letters.
Well, I read their letters. I read articles about them. I look at the old newspaper clippings. But what we do is we're using these street names as the opportunity to develop a narrative, and narratives where they really don't quite exist right now.
Well, it kind of organizes people's thinking as they pass along the trail and learn the history up. Which reminds me, Henry, we need to move to Roe.
Ah, Roe.
Roe is, and
you have a particular interest in Roe, Mary.
I have a particular interest in Roe because one of the pictures that Henry used in the marker belongs to moi.
Belongs to somebody I know.
Yes, and it's a picture of the row house. And the row house sat on the northwest corner of Shawnee Mission Parkway and Row, and there it sat, and it looked like that, and it has been sadly torn down many years ago.
Yeah, it's one of the many missing mansions that this project has uncovered. But Rowe, as you know, was one of the major landholders in Johnson
Talk about
County.
John Rowe, just
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit.
I mean, he was an Irish immigrant. He was very taken with the power that came from real estate ownership. He owned a lot of land in Missouri, and then he came to Johnson County. He ended up controlling about 1,600 acres, which was mainly for stock raising cattle. And in fact, he was considered one of the longest and oldest stockmen. He preferred the Chicago stockyards, oddly enough, to the Kansas City stockyards.
So he shipped his cattle to
Shipped his
Chicago?
cattle to Chicago.
By train?
By train,
Yeah.
yeah. But he was, so he owned 1,600 acres, and it was typical in those days when a road went through somebody's property, it took the name of the property owner. So there was Rowe. And then in the late 1930s, when a developer named Charles Vauder, started acquiring parcels to build some subdivisions, he decided to name this community he was building after the Rowe family, and thus you have Roland
Park.
Yeah. But there was also Rowe School, there was Rowe Pool. I mean, the Rowe family name is
Well, they hit it big there.
in the names. Now,
Yeah.
unfortunately, they had to keep on selling land to pay the taxes, and at the end, two of Rowe's daughters, as you know.
And we can show you what the Rowe sisters looked like. They lived in that house
lived in that-
a long time.
Oh, like into the 1950s.
And they're sitting on the front porch
What's
of that
interesting?
house.
What's interesting about these sisters is they both lived extremely long lives.
Well, they didn't look so awful young in that picture.
But they lived long lives. One of them remembered seeing some of the swales of the Santa Fe Trail going through the Rowe family property. And it's kind of ironic that there was this transportation at the beginning, and then, of course, it's knocked down to make way for that interchange. The house is knocked down.
Well, and am I correct that the Kansas City Interurban Railroad ran?
The Stang Line, the Stang Line, which was developed by William Strang, and it was actually called the Missouri-Kansas Interurban Railway, went through, well, it went from downtown Kansas City and Union Station all the way to Olathe. He sought easements and right-of-way,
But it went through.
it went through part of Rowe's property.
Yeah, and the station, and I mean, it ran between 1906 and 1940.
1940,
So
yeah.
we can, part of the walking trail is the Stang Line station and people getting ready to get on the interurban railroad. There were a number of interurban
Well, when
railroads.
people drive on Stang Line Road, that was the route of the Stang Line on the way to Olathe. It went right down to the county courthouse.
And it went through downtown Overland Park.
Well, I mean, it,
You know.
it created downtown Overland
Yeah,
Park. There
because
was no
there is
no downtown
Well, there's a
Overland
furniture
Park.
store in the Stang Line station.
That's the it was the it wasn't the station. It was the roundhouse. It was where the
That's right. That's
yeah.
where they turned around. But
Yeah.
it's still there, and you
yes,
can see
it's
it in
the
downtown
restoration.
Overland Park. Yeah.
Rather, what's it called? That furniture store.
Yeah, I forgot what the name of the front, but it's right there at the end of
Santa Fe.
Yeah, so you can go see it.
There's a little exhibit about the Stang Line in that store.
We got to move to Metcalf now, Henry, and we can kind of talk about Metcalf, then the Metcalf family.
So Metcalf was George Metcalf, and he was a banker who purchased some property right around where downtown Overland Park is and began subdividing it for subdivisions. And he was a friend of Strang's. And so Strang named that part of Metcalf that went through Overland Park after Metcalf, and then the thing
The
continued
good old
further.
boy network.
That's right. That's right. I think what's interesting about Metcalf, though, the road, not the person, is that Metcalf is the major north-south thoroughfare in Johnson County. That's not a superhighway. And the metamorphosis of Metcalf sort of reflects the changes that have taken place in Johnson County. So, you know, there were farms, then there were some houses, then there were the rise of the indoor shopping malls, and then that sort of went away. There was that great, you probably remember this, the King Louis when it was a bowling.
When I first moved to Johnson County, the only way to get across was 75th Street.
Oh, interesting.
So it came across and Metcalf was a 2-lane road, and Oak Park or Metcalf, the
Metcalf
mall,
South,
Metcalf South Mall had not that opened. I moved in the spring of 1967, and it opened that fall.
Yeah, and it lasted for not quite 30 years.
That's right. Which is 30 to 40 years is the life of any building, much. I think.
Well, that's why J.C. Nichols is so extraordinary when you consider how long the plaza has remained vital and viable. But you know, the King Louis is now going to be the
Johnson
the
County
new
Museum.
Johnson County Museum. It's a perfect spot for it and a perfect building for it. And I think that will bring a lot of enhanced exposure to Johnson County history.
And they moved the whole darn house into the basement, into the
did.
lower level.
They did.
Yeah.
I wanted to be there. I wasn't, but I wanted to go there. But so you see, that's how these. What I'm hoping, what we're expecting to happen is that these panels, by taking these little bite-sized bits of Johnson County history, will encourage people to go visit the museum and get more of it.
More of it, that's right. I want to pull the chicken ranch out before we talk about the chicken ranch.
The chicken ranch. Now,
it isn't what you think.
What you're it's not. No. It's not that at all. What you're referring to is one of the many multiple uses of Shawnee Mission, Shawnee Methodist Mission, which
because we're going to Mission Road next, so I'm segueing in there with the chicken ranch, Henry.
And you're choosing your favorite item in all that.
I am.
Isn't
yes.
that so, Mary? And what does that tell us about you, Mary?
I just think it's such fun.
So there was a brief period, like just several months in 1921. Now remember, this is when Prohibition was the law of the land, but it's also when certain places like Kansas City, Missouri, they played fast and loose with these kinds of things. And but there was a gangster there in Kansas City named Koppelman who had been run out of town, and so he took over one of the Shawnee Methodist Mission buildings, and it became a Prohibition-era roadhouse for a brief period of time. And the reason it was called a chicken ranch is because you would go there, and there would be these sort of white china cups, looked like teacups, and waiters would pour you whiskey as long as you could keep on paying. And the idea was you would be drinking a lot before you got your chicken dinner, which maybe was an hour to get the chicken dinner.
It took a long time.
It took a long time, so you
chicken.
could drink a lot
Yes.
before you ate chicken. And then if you wanted, up on one of the upper floors, there were these private quarters for couples and foursomes, and they could go in there alone, and they would be served, and whatever happened, happened. This lasted just for several months. It was actually revealed in a front page report in the Kansas City Times, and then the local...
And that story, by the way, is on the marker.
And then the local authorities came and shut it down and changed it, and Koppelman actually tried to bribe his way out of being arrested, but they wouldn't put up with it, and so he was arraigned.
Well, and then we have to move back in history just a little bit to Thomas and Sarah Johnson, who started the Shawnee Indian Mission, and they're to elevate the Indian character. That was the reason. And there they are, Thomas and Sarah Johnson, and their pictures appear as well. And the Shawnee Indian Mission was, actually, it still stands, not the whole thing, I think. Some of
There
the
are
buildings.
there are
Yeah.
3 remaining buildings
uh-huh.
from the Shawnee Methodist Mission. They are probably among the oldest remaining structures in Johnson County. I mean, they were here before there was a Johnson County. Now, of course, you know, historians are very mixed on Shawnee Methodist Mission, and there was a lot of ethnocentrism involved in these things, and there is a lot of evidence to suggest that, in fact, their approach was very destructive to indigenous culture. But I think the key point to remember is that Johnson County takes its name from Thomas Johnson, and it happened in 1855
I think it was.
when the capital of Kansas Territory was briefly at Shawnee Mission. And during this time,
The bogus legislature.
the bogus legislature, a pro-slavery dominated territorial legislature, convened there in July of 1856, and they declared the first 30-odd counties, and they named this county after Johnson, who was also one of the presiding officers of the legislature.
There is an interesting fact on the marker that I thought was interesting. Many of those legislators lived in Westport.
Right.
And so for
right.
25 cents,
they were Missourians. They were Missourians.
That's
and
right,
they took a hotel in Westport, and for 25 cents, they could take the stagecoach over to
The
Shawnee
Shawnee
Mission for the day, vote in all this pro-slavery legislation, and then go back to Missouri.
And so from there, though, the capital was moved to
Lecompton.
Lecompton.
Lecompton, which
my
was
mind went blank there for a
which
minute.
was a pro-slavery town set up to be
And
their
that
capital.
capital is still there. You can see that.
There are 2 structures that are remnant from that period. Yeah, Lecompton was named after Samuel Lecompte, who was the first Chief Justice of Kansas Territory, and was very a pro-slavery guy.
Yeah. See, but all these names and everything we take as part of our daily routine. We don't think about where they came from, and even why the Shawnee Indian Mission was put there is to elevate the character of Indians, but it was very destructive, as Henry said, to their culture. And so all these things generate conversations, I must say.
And the thing to remember is that the Shawnees are not native to Kansas. They were originally in Ohio and Virginia, and after several disastrous wars with the Americans, they agreed to be relocated to Kansas, because in those days, we're talking, you know, the 1820s, 1830s, Kansas was considered to be part of the great American desert, unsuitable for white settlement, unsuitable
and
for
Indian territory.
And it was Indian territory. So they would, we'll give it to the Indians. Okay, well that'll.
I have a map that shows Kansas as India before Kansas was a state, and it shows it as
Well, sure.
Indian
I mean,
territory.
the Wyandotte, the New York Indians, the Delaware, all of them were moved to Kansas, but it was barely much more than a generation before it was figured out, oh, you know what? Actually, Kansas is suitable for white settlement, and we need to organize this territory because we want to build that transcontinental railroad. So, so by the 1850s, the Indians were becoming displaced, and I think by the 1870s, they were all relocated to what was then Indian Territory, which of course is the present-day state of Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. You know, but I guess that I want to hit this point again, that those markers, if you read the history, will generate lots of family conversation and discussion, I think, and also school discussion as the school children and their teachers walk
Well,
that.
that's what I really want to happen here with this project. There's a woman I'm going to quote because I don't want to steal her line, because it's a brilliant line. I think maybe you know Julie Mulvihill from the Kansas Humanities Council, and Julie has a great line about this project and similar projects, and she says it's an opportunity to exercise your body and exercise your mind at the same time. And that's really what I think is going on here. And what I'm envisioning is that people will walk these trails, they'll take a look at these panels, they'll learn something. we're talking to the library about getting involved so that there'll be further reading going on. I think this can all happen. I think that this exercising of body and mind can really come together here and make this into, you know, a national model for what a trail can do to enhance the whole experience of place.
To enhance the experience of place, but also to raise the educational value of that experience of place so that it becomes part of the vision of the people who live there.
Well,
and the people who walk.
I think one of the things that comes out of this research and should come through in some of these panels is that, you know, there was a lot of thought that went into the evolution of Johnson County. You know,
not just your thought, the thought of
no, I mean the thought of many people.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a lot of hard work, but I think that begins to come through through the reading of these panels. And I think that's important because, again, if you look here, it's just always been like this, right? Well, it hasn't always been like this. And this is what, well, you know, you've been a big part of it. I mean, you've seen the changes, but for those of us who got here in the 1990s, you know, it's a different story. So, and that also goes for people who are being born, right? I mean, so they've got to get this story, and I think we're going to do that.
Henry.
Lest we forget, absolutely.
That's right. What are you gonna up to next? Henry has a very creative and active mind, I must say. Henry and I have been friends a long time.
It's very kind of you, Mary.
Yes.
I've got a similar project in Lawrence. It's also along a trail. It's also along a trail named after a creek, the Burroughs Creek Trail. And this is a 1.7 mile trail on the east side of Lawrence. This ties into the Quantrill Raid and the Oregon Trail. I don't know if you know this, there was a prisoner of war camp during World War II for captured Germans who'd been in the North African campaign. There were 300 of them that were based in Lawrence.
I did know that because the future manager of Oakwood Country Club was in that camp as a German.
Oh, how interesting.
And he stayed here.
So, and then of course it's named after William S. Burroughs, who lived about a block and a half from that trail for the last, I think, 17 years of his life.
So you're going to stay busy. But you know, as I thank Henry for coming, I have to quote him again. And he says, and then you do the research, you start finding connections, you discover old photographs and maps and other ephemera, and you put together a narrative with style and substance and a bit of wordplay that speaks to people's intelligence, and voila, you've got a story worth telling. And that's the name of the game, Henry.
We've got a lot of stories worth telling,
That's
and they'll
right.
be on the trail starting in late fall, and then the rest of them go up in the spring of 2017.
So we'll have to watch Henry's progress and his...
Well, you should take a walk with me sometime, Mary.
I've got a bad knee. I keep telling Henry, I got a bad knee, can't do that. But I am always proud to say that Henry Fortunato is my friend and my colleague, and I also helped fund the trail. So I am proud of all that.
And I thank you for that, and I agree with everything you said.
So welcome and goodbye. It goes awfully fast. Thank you, Henry.
Thanks, Mary.
And thank you for coming.